Hello, anti-novelists, Lilligans, curious onlookers, and friends. Everyone's welcome in the library. Welcome to this episode of Zettelkasten for Fiction, where imagination finds order. So, I'm bringing you today a specific answer to a specific question. Remember a few episodes back when I talked about scenes and sequels and how to build in good scene transitions so that your story flowed? I got a question from Marianne4242. Hello, Marianne. She asks, Victoria, can you explain what a good path to follow is when your scenes go wrong? Okay, great question. Too often, when someone is working through a story, things go wrong, or you write yourself into a corner and you don't know how to get out of it. Or maybe you just don't know where the story is going next because perhaps you've been pantsing your way through and maybe you get stuck. Or maybe you've been plotting your way through and you have everything so nicely plotted out, but you hit a wall when one of your plot points doesn't quite line up with the scene and then you're stuck. So in any of these cases, let's talk about scene repair. The first thing you need to think about is the story unit. Okay, a minimum viable story unit is a scene. It's generally about 500 words or so and encompasses a couple of paragraphs. So as you start to think about your story units, I want you to think about what is your comfortable unit for writing. For me, mine average around 850 to 950 words. That's a nice average for a scene. And then when I write the sequel, it's often about 600 to 700 words. That's just an average that I have learned after observing my writing process over the last 4 years. Put a pin in this because we're going to talk more about what I call your BIC score. BIC stands for butt in chair. That's the actual time that you spend writing, what you produce, and how much time it takes, so you can start setting some realistic goals. But we'll come back to that in the next video or two. Here, we're strictly dealing with the story units and what unit do you generally write in. So, your scene is where the action is. Your scene is the catalyst. That's the thing that happens that then results in the sequel, the reaction. That's when your character is perhaps reflecting on what's happened and making sense of it. It's when your character is looking over the sets of options to decide, oh my gosh, this has happened, what am I going to do next? It's when they are reacting to something in order to put together the next steps plan. Scenes and sequels, the action and the reaction of a story unit, are what result in chapters. That's when I was talking about using transitions to stitch those things together so that you take several scenes and sequels and you pull those together and stitch them into a chapter, and then you go on to the next one. So a chapter is just a narrative module that's full of story units. So scenes and sequels add up to chapters, and that's how you complete your way through the book. Now, let's look specifically. When I was talking about scene transitions back in the guide, I was telling you about scene transitions are what move a reader through the story. You can use a fight or a conflict, an argument, a disagreement. You can ask a question, introduce a mystery. It can be a rumination where your character's thinking about things. It could be a discovery or a milestone, like I like to think of the middle part of your story as discoveries and milestones. Or it could be danger or a cliffhanger. There's lots and lots of transitions out there. But what happens when it all goes sideways, or upside down, or backwards, or round and round, and you don't know how to solve that problem and you're stuck in the scene? I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions that I have just finished writing about for the book Zettelkasten for Fiction, where imagination finds order, which is the book that I'm writing for you to help you get your writing done. This is just a quick snapshot of the chapter about how to doctor and repair your scenes. So let's look at it. The first question you're going to ask yourself when you're stuck in a scene is, who did the thing happen to? Okay, was it a main character? Was it a side character? But in that scene, what happened and who did it happen to? So you know who you're focused on. Is this focusing on the point of view of my main character? Or is it focusing maybe on a side character? Or perhaps it's focusing on an antagonist or a villain. We're going to talk about the differences between an antagonist, an opposition, or an obstacle, and a villain or a true bad guy. Again, down the road when we get to that, so put a pin in that as well. But suffice it to say, for these purposes, you're going to ask, who did this action happen to in this scene that I'm stuck on? Second question, why did it happen, or why is it important? So ask yourself, was it important to the plot? Did this happen because it moves the plot forward? Like the car crashes and that's what leads to them having to walk into the town, and that's where some important person gets met or discovered? Why did the thing happen, and why is it important? Now, what I just described is an external importance, right? The car crashed and therefore they had to walk into town. That's a plot point. What if it's an internal reason? What if the thing that happened is your character realizes, holy cow, my spouse has been lying to me this whole time? And they're going to have to make an internal shift about how they feel about and approach this person who has now lied to them for the last 15 years or whatever. An internal shift is also a good thing that can happen, that can be important. Third question, what sequence prompted the thing that happened? So for example, I made a note, draw it. This is something that I am taking from the chapter on using structural modeling as a way to find your way through your story. So let's say, for example, X happened to my character, all right? And as a result of X, this could happen, or this could happen. Maybe the one thing that happens is something happens and that character is prompted to leave, okay? They storm out, they're angry, they're shocked, they storm out. Well, then you're going to write out, what are the consequences of them leaving? What are the consequences? What's the sequel of them storming out? And what prompted that? Okay, so you go back to your X event. Well, what if then alternatively you explore, what if they stay? If this X sequence or action prompted them to stand their ground, to level chin up and square their shoulders and decide they're going to stay and they're going to fight and stand their ground, that is a very different set of things that may happen as a result of that. So draw out from whatever the X event is, what are the possibilities of leaving or staying, and then what are the consequences of those possibilities. That's another way to look at the flow of your story and help yourself see the higher level picture so that you can make decisions about what actually needs to happen next. Actually drawing it out, modeling that story, can help you figure out what the next scenes or sequels or plot points need to be. And then the fourth and final suggestion is, where did they end up? After these things that happened, you've identified who it happened to, why it happened and why it's important, was it internal or external, and what sequence prompted it. You've drawn out, you've modeled for yourself the possibilities of that sequence, and then you're asking yourself ultimately, as a result of those things, where did they end up? If they leave, maybe they go through a series where they end up confiding in an old friend. So the X event happens, they leave, they go to confide in that trusted long-term friend, and as a result, that friend gives them advice that leads them to their next action. Boom, now you've got a way through the scene. Alternatively, X happens, they decide, I am going to stay, I'm standing my ground, I'm not going to leave, I'm not going to give up, I'm going to choose to square my shoulders, square my chin, and be strong. Well, as a result of staying, perhaps the consequence is they finally confront that person, perhaps, who has been an obstacle or a burden to them. And as a result of that confrontation, your main character becomes that much more strong. They step into their power, right? That's an internal shift. That's the kind of internal reaction, internal sequel that could be a midpoint where that character who has been passive or only reactive turns and becomes active and taking charge of their fate. That could be the very thing that a story pivots on that then turns that passive character into the hero that you're trying to write. So, as I've written out this chapter for you, I've given you a lot of options and ways to walk yourself through this. This is just a snapshot of some of those tools that I'm packing into the chapter on scene and chapter repair when you get stuck. So, play with this yourself. Toggle those buttons and start to think about, if my story's doing this and I'm stuck, what can I use to get myself out? This is another tool in that belt. As always, thank you so much for your subscribing. I so much appreciate each and every one of you. You are blowing my mind on a daily basis that you're joining me. I will do my part. I will keep my butt in my chair. I will keep hammering out these chapters for you. I am about at 23,000 words of the Zettelkasten for Fiction book, Where Imagination Finds Order. And I'm on track to finish around September 21st. So for those of you that have opted in at victoriacrowder.com that you want to be notified when the book is available for pre-release, I'm right on schedule around the third week of September to have the pre-release ready. So I'm excited to share this with you guys. I think it's going to be a very useful and helpful tool. And as always, again, I'm thankful that you're joining me on this journey. So take care, and I will see you tomorrow.